Let's start the program. Welcome to the TRAK Zoom Away Blue Friday. And this is a program that's part of a series we call Beyond the Boat. This includes 3 steps to kayaking and keys to avoiding deep trouble and wellness equals water. My name is Hans Trupp, and I am tuning in from the east coast of Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And am a TRAK pilot and honored to work with this elite team of helping give people access to a life unleashed and more time in the water. And this particular program is the keys to avoiding deep trouble. Today's subject is Greenland paddling and paddle use techniques. We have a guest today that can help us understand the history of kayaking, how it relates to the origins, if you will. And this, we're referencing back to the east and west coasts of Greenland here, and the practical aspects of the Greenland stick. And it's a really unique paddle design. We'll get some more on that. But in this honoring of the origin, we're going to really hope to impress upon people to help them have the courage, understand the courage that people had using those paddles, how they got out on frigid waters in kayaks, made of sealskin with original whalebone and wood to bring home subsistence to their family as a real way of survival for the individuals, the families, and entire villages. So the big idea of this call is to give the TRAK community here a holistic approach at looking at options of using a Greenland paddle when it works and where there might be compromises. So that's the big idea. Let's get started here. I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, is that I'm going to mute everyone right now, and then you should be able to unmute yourselves. This is just to help manage background noise. And please unmute as you see fit. Mike, you're going to need to unmute yourself right now. So I'm proud to announce right now a special guest on this show, Mike Jackson. He hails from Victoria, British Columbia on Vancouver Island. He's a long-time professional and retired educator. He's an avid paddler and a traveler, to say the least. He, probably has a duffel bag packed at all times, ready to go to as far as Antarctica in a moment's notice. He grew up as a nomad with his family. He's lived all over the world. Now he and his wife Monica have been living in Victoria, British Columbia, right on the Straits of Juan de Fuca and the inside passage of the Gulf Islands for many years. He's a successful father with 2 adult daughters, and he's really had a lifelong passion for science and teaching science and environmental sciences and nature study. He really lives it, and he really shares it successfully with an audience from all over the world. He had a Greenland trip that was postponed or canceled this year with Nat Geo, but you can always follow him on Facebook and see incredible images from places like Antarctica or the Falkland Islands or Greenland, and helping to share his love for nature and the ecosystems with the rest of the world. And Mike is he's a SKG ABC Level 2 Sea Kayak Guide and founder of Ciska, which we'll talk about a little bit more. He's it's Victoria Sea Kayaking Club, but he likes to paddle everything from flat water to intertidals, races to surf and rock gardens, and the TRAK does all these things. He's been a really tremendous contributor to the TRAK Pilot Foundation, or TRAK Pilot program, and is a foundational member of that. And he's paddled most of the way around Vancouver Island, which if you don't know about it, I encourage you to take a look at it on a map and see what kind of exposure he might have dealt with that, and we certainly encourage him to complete that soon. If you want to see more about Mike right now, I will post a little comment here, a link to his blog that has a good log of all his paddling. He's joined us at the Pacific Rim Camp. It's a flagship camp that's coming up. He's been a very successful contributor and educator there in years past, and he's planning on joining us as a guide and instructor on the camp this year in September at Wyatt Point on the wild, wet West Coast. So we're delighted to have him join us here today. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Well, thanks, Hans. It's great to be here again, and I think my internet connection's a little bit better than the last time we tried. I presume people can hear me now, and I don't sound like an alien. Yeah, that's good.
Awesome.
So, yeah, I've been paddling basically ever since I came to Victoria 33 years ago, and I've been paddling a Greenland paddle probably for 20 plus years now, and
terrific.
I love the Greenland paddle, and my goal today is to give you a little bit of history, and then talk about some tips and things that might make it better for you.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time for that. A little bit of introduction here. What are you up to now, and what are the details of your latest paddling adventure?
Well, I think my latest paddling adventure was a paddle around the bay just down the street from me, and that's been my go-to backyard paddle.
Yeah,
Cadbro Bay is fantastic.
You've got such an ideal setup there. Once again, for folks, I am posting the blogspot.ca URL in the chat box where you can take a look at all of Mike's paddling log. He's been diligent about keeping a log, not unlike a scientific mindset to do something like that. But have you take a look at that. So what's in the lineup for you, Mike, in terms of what's next, in terms of your next big paddling adventure?
Well, the one I want to finish off my paddle around the island, and I have one section left, which is Port Hardy to Campbell River, but not sure when I'm going to get that done, but that's certainly it's on my list, my to-do list, and I say probably my next paddle is going to be somewhere just down the road here, and probably out to Chatham and Discovery Islands next weekend. I'm doing a trip with Ciska out there.
Okay, terrific.
Yep.
Fantastic. I am actually going up to the Broughtons for a motorboat tour in later this month. So if you need a shuttle up to Port Hardy, let me know. That might work out. Yep. So, we'd mentioned Ciska. That's another gig that you have. What else is going on for you, and what's your involvement with the Victoria Kayak Club?
So Ciska is a sea kayaking club in Victoria. We've got about 250 members, and we run a bunch of paddles, a couple of paddles every month. Actually, this summer we're doing a bit more, and we've been around for about 10 years, 11 years or so. I used to be the president of the club, but I've stepped back from that, and I'm enjoying the freedom.
Great. Well, thank you for your work in terms of really pulling a community together, give it resources and opportunities to bring paddlers together for mentorship and safety and education. That's really fantastic. We appreciate your work.
I should mention that two things that we did as part of Ciska was to bring both Helen Wilson and Dubside to Victoria to do some coaching on Greenland rolling and paddling. So
fantastic. All right.
Did that a few years back.
A real passion project. One thing I'd just like to mention, because I'm so intrigued by it, Mike, with regard to your other gigs, but you regularly go out on adventure expedition cruise ships as a naturalist and give tours in some of the bucket list locations in the world. In just 30 seconds, tell us briefly about that gig. How does that work?
Yeah, so I work as a naturalist guide on board these ships, and there's kind of two companies that I work for. One is National Geographic Lindblad, and that does kind of Arctic and Antarctic, and then the other company I work for is local out of Victoria. It's called Maple Leaf Adventures, and we do trips up and down the coast. Obviously, all that's on hold this year. Yeah,
fantastic. Well, we appreciate you having the bandwidth to be able to contribute here, and part of that is that industry getting shut down. Let me ask you this: what do you like most about coaching sea kayaking, Mike?
Oh boy, so many things. I think sea kayaking is one of the best, forms of exercise and peaceful. It's just a peaceful way to get yourself out into nature. And I just love the fact that when you're coaching people about sea kayaking, it's helping them get out there.
Terrific. Fantastic. That's really in alignment with TRAK's core purpose, which is, we like to call it life unleashed internally. And glad for that. So we're delighted to have you here with us. I know you've got some photos and some slides you'd like to share about Greenland paddling. In advance of that, I'd like just to get a sense of this audience around, what people's experience is in with Greenland paddling. So I'm going to open a poll right here. I'm launching this poll, and the question is, what is your experience with the Greenland style paddle and paddling techniques? Have you never tried it? Have you tried it once or just a few times? Do you own a paddle but with limited use, like a backup paddle? Or do you own a paddle and use it part-time, like 15%? Or do you own a Greenland paddle and use it full-time as a primary blade of 75% or greater? So if you're in that 15 to 75%, let us know it's part-time. If you're using it 75% or more, let us know that it's a full-time gig for you. Welcome to the call. We got Rodolfo, who's just joined us with his cat from Chile, I think. It's Chile, yeah. We'll keep this poll open for a few more minutes. This will really help Mike understand who the audience is and how we get going here. So Mike, I know you're going to share kind of some images and some slides. Feel free to bring that up now as a screen share if you like. And we're going to keep this poll.
Get that to work.
We'll keep this poll up for about 30 more seconds.
Okay, does that work? So can people see my slides now?
I can see your slides. We got some thumbs up from Cecil and from Curtis.
Perfect.
And looks like we've got 80% of folks who have contributed to the poll here. I'm going to go ahead and end this, and I'm going to share this poll. I'll share the poll results, and it looks like this is interesting. The vast majority, 34% of folks who answered on this, they own a Greenland paddle and use it full-time as a primary blade. So really fantastic.
1/3.
Mike, this is the audience we're dealing with, and almost an equal amount is that we do have about 30% of folks have never even tried the Greenland paddle. So your challenge as an educator here, Mike, is to be able to bridge both of those audiences and make it really inclusive. So that's the poll. Thanks so much for your contribution, and that's kind of our focus today then. And Rodolfo, thanks for wearing your mask for this gathering.
Well, Rodolfo. So I'm really glad to see that we've got a fantastic mix of experienced Greenland paddlers to people who've never tried it and everything in between. And my goal will be to make the other 2/3 become regular users of a Greenland paddle. So anyway, speaking to my slides, this is a picture of a group of 3 of my friends out in my local paddling area with Chatham Island out there in the background. And I think, let me see if I can get the next slide up here. Okay. Well,
while you're doing that, let me ask you a couple questions, Mike. How have you come to know about and appreciate the art of Greenland paddling?
Well, I first tried a Greenland paddle about 20 years ago when I was doing a trip out on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Mm-hmm. And a guy I was working with as a co-guide, I said, try my paddle for a couple of days. And I did. And it was the first time I'd finished a trip and wasn't either tired or sore after paddling multiple full days in a row. So that was kind of my hook. And then right after that, I had one made for me. And then I've been basically paddling them ever since.
Terrific. I'd like to ask you this question, Mike, but I'd also like for folks to answer this in the chat box here because we have such a large population of folks who have actually tried this. Why do you think people are attracted to Greenland paddling?
Why do I think people are?
Yeah. Or I'm asking why you were originally attracted to it.
Yep.
Why is it that you did that? You'd mentioned one piece about it being relatively easy. I'd like to hear on your body. I'd like to hear from other folks what originally encouraged them, inspired them to pick it up in the first place.
Cool. Well, I will. Should I just talk a little bit about the slides while people are answering there?
Yeah, go for that.
So anyway, there's a picture of me up on the screen with. This is a West Greenland paddle that I made at a course with Brian Schultz down in Oregon. And it was designed, or it was basically a copy of a museum specimen that was collected in 1933 in West Greenland. And one of the aspects of Greenland paddling I like is that sort of cultural and historic connection. And this shows how much I like it there. And you can see I've got both a wooden storm paddle and a carbon Greenland paddle. I'll be doing more on that in a minute. And I want to see now. So what I want to show you here is another thing that I love about Greenland paddling and the Greenland style paddling is the whole rolling aspect. And I probably will talk more about that later. But I have a little video that I'm going to try sharing. And I don't know if this will work for people, but let's try it. So let's see if I can get that to go.
Terrific. Tell us what we're seeing here, Mike.
Okay, so did that work for people?
Let's get a thumbs up if you could see that.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So I was doing just a couple of basic rolls with a Norsak, which is the throwing stick, the Greenland throwing stick. And kind of wanted to show you that, you know, part of the Greenland style of paddling is this very relaxed rolling style. And you could see that a roll like that appears effortless, and it's really all about your body position. And when we coach Greenland paddling, it's all about teaching people the shoulder position, the head position, and all of those kinds of things. So just a little bit about the evolution of Greenland kayaks. And in Greenland, they're actually called a kayak and spelt a little bit differently. But they started off as a hunting craft for hunting seals and small whales, both in Arctic Canada and in Greenland. And they're intended as basically stealthy hunting crafts, and they were made from local materials. And I would say that the Greenland or Inuit kayak is really ancestral to all modern kayaks. And a lot of people, when they see a Greenland paddle, think it's an unusual or a new style of paddle, but really it's the original kayak paddle. And I think it's surprisingly efficient, and it's also really quiet to paddle with. So this picture kind of shows the setup of a Greenland hunting kayak, and you can see the hunter has got his paddle in one hand, and he's got a harpoon and the throwing stick, or the Norsak as it's called, on in his other hand, and he's throwing it. He has his line coiled up on his front deck, and you'll notice he's got a big sealskin float on his back deck, which would be attached to the throwing line. And here are a couple of, this is an archive picture. You can see that they have little white flags on the front of their deck, and those are basically to hide them from their prey. But you can see that they're all set up to go hunting. Another thing I wanted to talk about is one of the fun things about Greenland paddling and Greenland kayaking is even building your own kayak. And this is this was the course that I attended with Brian Schultz, and you can see that basically the TRAK kayak that many of us are paddling is clearly related to the traditional Greenland kayak, in that it's a skin-on-frame kayak, and I think it's pretty darn cool. So I might talk more about that. Here's a close-up of a museum specimen. You can see that the skin of the kayak was made out of seal skin. There were the leather deck straps, and all of those little bits are made out of traditional materials. There's a close-up of some of the, they would use ivory or bone to make their, I used a golf ball, a wiffle ball on my kayak, but that was the traditional version. So you could slide a paddle underneath it easily. Anyway, that's just a few pictures that I wanted to share about the Greenland kayak. And I think what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about some of what I see as some of the advantages and possibly disadvantages of a Greenland kayak, a Greenland paddle.
True. We got one question from Larry here.
Okay.
Is that relates to the boats specifically. Is it true that paddlers were sewn into their boats?
I believe that they would, the tuilik, as it was called, the kind of combination jacket and spray skirt was sewn in, or sewn on when they left the shore, and basically that meant that they had to be able to roll, and I think that's in part why rolling became such an integral part of Greenlandic kayak culture.
Terrific. Okay, yeah, thanks for answering that one.
So first of all, a couple of disadvantages. Because the blade is very thin, it's a little bit harder to accelerate. And I find that sometimes when I'm surfing or in a place like Surge Narrows, getting the acceleration with a Greenland paddle is not as easy as with a Euro blade. But for me, that's not a big deal. And the other thing is that it's not really good in shallow water. And the reason for that is that when you're paddling with a Greenland paddle, you need to bury the blade deeply in the water. And if you're in a rock garden area, that's not the best. So those are just a couple of circumstances where I think Greenland paddle may not be the best option. But for everything else, I use my Greenland paddles for all other paddling, touring, day trips, rolling, and so on and so forth. A couple of things that I think are wonderful about it is the simplicity of the paddle. It's super symmetrical. You always know exactly where your paddle is. If your hands are holding onto the paddle, you know where the blades are, and I think that's wonderful. And I'm pretty sure that, well, those of you who already use a Greenland paddle know that the width of the paddle should be really no more than what you could hold in the grip of your hand like this. And the idea being that you can then slide the paddle. And I'm just going to quickly step up here and grab a paddle. So you can see here, I'm holding the paddle on edge. And one of the important things is to be able to slide that paddle and slide your hands back and forth along that paddle. And by being able to do that, you can really maneuver with it.
Terrific.
So what else can I say there? So being able to extend the paddle, and if you're holding the paddle with two hands at one end of the paddle, the entire rest of the paddle is available for leverage. And that can be very good when you're starting to learn to roll.
Terrific. A couple of things that Brad Atkinson points out here in the chat space is that, carved by wood, they're pretty easy to make, and they're naturally buoyant. The other thing was that he'd mentioned that they're warmer to hold, warmer to grip as being made of wood.
Yeah, the feeling of a wood paddle is really nice. And here's another single piece red cedar paddle that I got to get it in front of the camera. And you can see it's pretty well used here. And the feel of a wood paddle is very, it's just wonderful. Whoops, I just knocked my lights there. Okay. What else did I want to say there about?
Rebecca's asking about, what are your thoughts on kind of the newer multi-piece carbon paddles?
So I have both single-piece paddles and multi-piece paddles, and the multi-piece are definitely better for traveling. I think probably the ideal for traveling would be a three-piece paddle. A two-piece paddle is still quite long. It's almost 4 feet long, so it's actually longer than the TRAK bag. But a three-piece paddle would fit inside a TRAK bag. And one of the companies that used to make those, Northern Light Paddles, hasn't operated in a while, but they made a three-piece paddle, and I believe Graham Kayaks in
Mm-hmm.
Denmark makes a three-piece. They're
Okay.
pricey, but really cool.
One of the things Harold is saying about advantages is that he's never had a blister from Greenland paddling, but plenty from far more expensive Euro carbon paddles. So here we've listed a couple of advantages and disadvantages. Sounds like disadvantages were they're not very good in shallow water, and because of the limited power face, they can be hard to accelerate. But that's really overshadowed by the great advantages, which is you can extend and use the entire paddle. It's easy to slide to position yourself. It sounds like your orientation of the paddle is always really clear if it's in your hands. It's really better in storm conditions, and it's got such symmetry and simplicity that it's there's never a disorientation around it.
That's right. That's
yeah.
right.
Some of the other things people are commenting on is that they're really quiet and comfortable, and really fantastic for rolling and bracing, which is a product of that extension you've pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And I think it's also kind of cool, just that whole kind of traditional feel of Greenland paddling is fun. I kind of like that tradition.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. So tell us about some, you mentioned you were going to actually maybe give us some tips on how to make paddling with a Greenland paddle better. What are your comments on that?
Okay, I'm going to stand up here for a minute and push my chair out of the way and grab a paddle and see if I can do this without, okay, I'm just going to put the camera up a little bit. So a couple of things that I think people should know about is that the generally accepted correct place to hold your paddle is with your fingers kind of curled around the shaft and the rest of your hand lying on the shoulder of the paddle. If you have a shouldered paddle, I think you can probably see that this paddle has a bit of a shoulder on it. Mm-hmm. And the separation of your hands is generally less than that of a Euro paddle. I think with a Euro paddle, you'd be more holding it out like here, but with a Greenland paddle, it's slightly closer together. And so that would be one thing. The other thing that I think is actually very important is when I hold my paddle, and I'm going to try and turn sideways here. Actually, I'm going to put this paddle down and get my storm paddle because it's shorter.
So it sounds like the reason you might choose a storm paddle, Mike, is because when it's out of the water, there's less resistance in high winds. Any other thing that's less obvious about why you would choose to have a storm paddle in your quiver?
Well, so the storm paddle, and you notice that the only difference between the storm paddle and the regular paddle is that the loom length here mm-hmm. is only about 8 inches, and the idea there is that you're holding it. One hand is on the shoulder, and then the other hand is on the blade, and okay. Because of that, you have a very little upper blade resistance to any wind. And I think that's why they call it a storm paddle. But for me, the actual biggest advantage is that it fits really nicely on my front deck without no assembly required, if that makes mm-hmm. sense. So the paddle is ready to go should I lose my main paddle. And so as a spare, I think it's an ideal spare in that regard. But what I was going to try and say is that when you're holding the paddle, can you notice that my wrists are almost completely horizontal in a very relaxed position? Mm-hmm. Can you see that on the video?
Yes.
And when you're holding your paddle like that, you might notice that the paddle is canted. Do you see it's got an angle to it?
Yes.
And that's also important. If you try and hold the paddle like this, so it's vertical, you'll find that the paddle will want to wiggle water. And a lot of people, when they first try to paddle a Greenland paddle, feel that wiggly and they find that very disconcerting. But if you give it a little bit of an angle, and I would say the angle is going to be something that you discover by experience and practice, but I find generally just a little bit of an angle is perfect for allowing you to slide through the water. And I say my office is not the best place, but it's the only place I have a camera on my computer.
Terrific. So it sounds like, you know, taking advantage of the foil technique or foil
Yeah.
shape of the blade is helpful in terms of getting it through the water and possibly helping to increase the effectiveness of that blade through the water.
Yeah, and also two more things that I wanted to point out. One is that with a Euro blade, you tend to only put the actual blade part in the water.
Mm-hmm.
But with a Greenland paddle, I really recommend that you almost try and put your pinky at the water surface with every stroke. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So and by doing that, you're burying the blade much deeper and you're getting full advantage of the blade's width. So that's, so pinky to the water. And you also are pushing with the top hand as much as you're pulling, in fact, even more so than you're pulling, pivoting with the lower hand. And you tend to follow through much, much more with a Greenland paddle than you would with a Euro paddle.
Mm-hmm.
So push, and you'll also might notice that when you're pushing, your hand you don't need to grip that paddle very hard. You're kind of pushing almost with an open hand. You may find your cadence is a little bit higher, but
Okay.
those kind of things, the pinky in the water, the loose grip, the canted angle, not horizontal, but at a just so your wrists are comfortable. And I think that's partly what makes the paddle so easy on your wrists and your elbows and shoulders, is because you're holding it at a very natural angle.
Terrific. I've just posted that checklist, if you will,
Yep.
in the chat space of, you know, simple tips to make paddling with a Greenland paddle better. Hands closer together, lower the elbow, have a looser grip, use the pinky to measure proper depth. Really ensure that you've got an angle canting forward to eliminate flutter and make it easier on your horizontal with the wrist, and then following through more than a Euro paddle with pushing with the open hand and having a higher cadence are all elements that make paddling with a Greenland paddle easier. Terrific.
Yeah, for sure.
And now I'm hearing a couple of things about roles in the chat room. I'll get to that in a second, Mike.
Yes.
But want to ask you a question here. You know, you've participated a lot in Greenland symposiums and in rolling competitions. How many roles are there? And what's going on with this uptake with increase in reference to Greenland paddling culture?
So actually rolling was probably one of the reasons that I really adopted Greenland style paddling, because learning to roll with a Greenland paddle is, I think, much, much easier. It's certainly very easy to teach people to roll with a Greenland paddle. And learning what we call the standard Greenland roll, it's only one out of, I think, 36 different maneuvers that were in the Greenland competition. And maybe a little bit later I can show you a video clip I've got of me doing a whole bunch of those different rolls, including brick rolls and so on and so forth. A few years back, a company in Seattle put together or organized a kind of Greenland kayaking symposium every November. And I went to that, I think, 3 years in a row and competed. And I think I came third 3 years in a row. So, and I think they stopped the competition after the third year when the first three places were all taken by Canadians.
Fantastic. I've got a question from Bruce Unterman here. He's wondering, does the pushing hand slide up the shaft some?
I don't think so. I think when you're in your normal paddle stroke, you're holding the paddle at the shoulder, and so the shoulder helps you to what's the word? Key in on the right part of the paddle to hold. It can
Got it.
slide, and if you want a slightly more powerful stroke, you can do a partial sliding stroke, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think also the Greenland paddle, because of the follow through, kind of actually emphasizes and encourages you to torso rotate, which is something everybody talks about with paddling, but I think the torso rotation is really emphasized as part of Greenland paddling. But getting back to the rolling, there were 36 different maneuvers, and in the competition, you would do everything from literally laying on the water in what's called a side scull, and to a thing called a straitjacket roll, which is where you literally had to hold your elbows like this and roll with just your body and your head. And I never got that one. And the furthest I ever got to was one where you do you have to hold the back of your neck with your hand, and it's called the elbow roll, and you have to roll up with just your elbow. And
incredible bow control there. Yeah.
But anyway, there were various points assigned for doing all those different rolling maneuvers. You know, so the simple ones got 1 point, and the complicated ones got 10 points. And the competition, you basically had to do the rolls on both sides and without messing them up, and the best score won.
Yeah, cool, terrific. So it sounds like really this this origin of paddling that's based in paddling ancestry is really coming more into mainstream. It sounds like with the exposure of these types of events, and with
Yep.
it's really driving popularity.
So I just saw a question from Renee
Yes.
about the follow through, and yes, you do go past the hip. You tend to kind of go to where the paddle naturally wants to come out, and then the next blade, the other side, wants to go in. And I think because you're not just pushing or pulling the blade through the water, you're kind of slicing it through the water. The airfoil effect continues throughout the stroke.
Okay.
I hope that answers Renee's question there.
Yeah, so folks that can't see that, if they're on the phone, Renee's question was, as Mike's talking about following through more than with the Euro paddle, his question is, does that mean that the power phase is going past 90 degrees more than a Euro paddle? And his question is, isn't this add an inefficiency into the system because you might just be lifting water? So I just want to state that question. I think you've answered that, Mike. It sounds like there's also an added efficiency there because you're not resetting as often because you're going a little further, I would guess. Renee, I hope that answers your question. Give us a thumbs up if it did. And as relates to rolling, I want to bring in another question here too. And that is that, you know, Alexander has said that, you know, he's good rolling with a Greenland paddle, and in a Greenland boat, he finds it nearly effortless. But he says, you know, it's not as easy, I guess, in a TRAK due to a kind of a higher combing in the back. And Harold countered that with front finishing or a storm roll might help with that in terms of TRAK specific. What's your comment on that, Mike, on helping people do a more effective Greenland roll in a modern design of a Greenland boat, which is the skin-on-frame TRAK 2.0?
I think there's no question that the back deck is higher, but when you're doing a Greenland roll, it's actually okay to lift your butt out of the seat when you're doing the roll, so you can actually still kind of use the lower back deck position. But you're right that a forward finishing roll is probably a better roll for the TRAK in that regard. But I found that both forward and back deck finishing rolls are all just fine.
Terrific. Thanks for that. I hope that answers your question, Alexander.
Actually, I also wanted to kind of follow on a little bit about the rolling competition. So the rolling competition starts off by a whole bunch of rolls where you're using the full standard Greenland paddle.
Mm-hmm.
It then transitions to a bunch of rolls where you're just using the Norsak, as it's called, which is developed from the throwing stick. And the Norsak gives you obviously much less leverage than your paddle. You then transition to a hand roll where you're allowed to use your hand. And then you have to do what's called a fist roll. You actually have to hold a stone and then show the stone at the end of your roll. And the idea there is that you can't really use the kind of the planing effect of your hand. And you then go to, say the hand roll, and then you do the elbow roll, and then you can do the straight jacket roll if you're that flexible. And then there's back deck finishing rolls, there's forward finishing rolls, there's all kinds of weird rolls. There was a what they call a shotgun roll where you actually had to hold the paddle in your elbow, and I don't know if I can do this, but you basically had the paddle stuck in your stuck in your armpit here, and the idea being that you would be able to roll if you had a dislocated shoulder or had injured your other arm. And so some of the Greenland rolls, I think, were, how can I say, that their origin came from necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the idea of the competition was that if you practice your rolls regularly, you would be safe in the water. I think also some of the more complicated rolls were really so that if you can roll, for example, with your elbow behind your neck or your hands in a straitjacket, that means that you really can roll. And it was just developing those skills. Terrific. And so that's how you end up with, I think, between the back deck finishing rolls, the forward finishing rolls, and there's a side finishing roll called a storm roll. Those all combine to give you, I think, 36 different maneuvers.
Terrific. Yeah, Harold commented that regardless of whether you're sewn in or not, the water temperatures where this was developed were such that rolling is mandatory. You're not going to come out of your boat because that would be certain death. So really, this was such a critical part of survivability if you're going to be out hunting that I imagine that apprentice hunters would probably work for years on ensuring that they had bomb-proof rolls in all these fashions in order to be able to, I guess, get the check-off box to be able to go out and actually hunt and expose themselves. I can imagine that the members of the community that were hunters from kayaks were incredibly valuable to the community, and the survivability was critical. Before you move on, I got a question from George Rodney here. It sounds like he's really newly transitioning from recreational kayaking to ocean kayaking, and he's still in the process of learning different strokes and maneuvers with a Euro paddle. He's asking, should he wait till he's more accomplished with a Euro before adding the transitions to Greenland paddle, or are they in parallel?
I would say try a Greenland paddle, and if it feels good with you, that's the paddle you should learn with. If it feels good for you. If you like the feeling of it, and what's the word I'm looking for, and you think you want to go ahead with it, then I would learn all of the strokes with the Greenland paddle. And I would argue that most of the Euro style strokes like bow draws and stern rudders and all of those kinds of standard paddling strokes are essentially the same with a Greenland paddle as with a Euro paddle, except that I think a Euro paddle is a little bit more forgiving.
Okay, great.
It doesn't catch the water.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, George. It sounds like having one in your quiver is a good starting spot, and maybe trying one first, make sure it has a good feel for you. You know, a great segue into another piece of or I guess topic around this is Bruce Hunterman's asking, you know, is there a guide for choosing the right Greenland paddle or the length of Greenland paddle?
Well, I think Hans, you should paste in Graham Kayak's site into the chat, because he talks, I think, wonderfully about how there is no perfect rule for choosing the right length. But I can give you a couple of pointers. You can kind of see, I'm going to get my regular paddle here. I'm 5'10" or so, and my paddle, I think, is about 86 inches. And you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm just holding the end of my paddle, and my fingertips are basically just able to wrap around the end of the paddle. And that's a good paddle for me. That said, I can adapt and adjust to many different lengths of paddle. So this one I think is 87 or 88 inches. This wooden one here is, I don't know if you can see that there's a difference of about 3 or 4 inches in these paddles, and both of them work fine for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it sounds like in very simple terms, is that the length isn't quite as important, especially if you're more accomplished. But if you're holding the paddle at the shoulder with one hand, you should be able to just kind of wrap your fingers around the far end of it. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think there are some things that, for example, if you have a wider kayak, you might want a longer paddle. And if you're taller, you might want a longer paddle. So there are a few things out there, but there's quite a few good links on the site on how to choose a paddle. And I guess my best advice is don't be too, what's the word? Set in your ways, or there's a bit of flexibility.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
When you hold the paddle, it should feel comfortable.
Got it. Yeah. Cool. So it's not too rigid, that whole process of choosing your paddle and or your paddle length. I'm gonna I posted Graham's site, but I'm also gonna post the specific link to choosing your paddle for folks like that are interested in learning more about that and gathering more information.
And Brad also just pointed out when we talk about Inuit, and the singular of Inuit is Inuk, and we have Canadian Inuit and Greenland Inuit as very similar traditions. In fact, they share quite a bit of their language.
Interesting. So
I was traveling with a guy.
So the East Coast Greenlanders and the West Coast would have similar sort of origins in terms of language and use. How did that bridge get made?
Well, I think that the population of northeastern Canada, Nunavut, and Greenland was kind of all part of the same general sequence. And I was traveling with an Inuk a couple of years ago, and he found that when he arrived in the Greenland villages, he was able to communicate quite effectively in his Canadian Inuit language, Inuktitut, and he was able to,
That's fascinating. Are there any speculations that Northwest Passage link was part of that cultural commonality?
Well, there's no question that the peoples who people that area would have traveled across the northern part of both Canada and over to Greenland. I mean, literally, Greenland and Canada are separated by a strait at one point that's only, I don't know, I think it may not even be 10 kilometers across. It's pretty narrow. You can see both sides in the Fram Strait. I've forgotten the name of it, but anyway.
I see. So the overwater passage to get to to the North American mainland was narrow, and sounds like there's suspicions that it was an overland travel, possibly.
Well, also over the ice. Remember that for most of the year, that whole northern section is completely ice covered, and the Inuit tend to do a lot of their traveling, or most of their traveling, when there's ice out. And
Yeah.
so they can actually travel across the sea.
What an incredible migration. Garrett's asking, I guess back to kind of the rolling idea, what would a typical training day look like for an adolescent Inuit that was maybe on a, kayak track, if you will?
Bottom line is I have no idea.
Yeah.
I haven't been that, but one of the things that's interesting about the training is that part of the Greenland competitions was a thing called rope gymnastics, and they would actually practice a bunch of the rolling maneuvers essentially on ropes, and those basically enabled them to kind of keep fit and keep agile through the winter by using these rope tricks.
Cool, fantastic. So really focusing on fundamentals, it sounds like is critical. Both the ropes, the dryland training with harpoon throwing and that sort of stuff. I know you've got some images of kind of how that dryland training might look. Maybe we can get to those. And Rodolfo's showing displaying a backdrop of his crew out there with a whole display of Greenland paddles. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Excellent. So we've talked about choosing a paddle length. Any other things that you would offer in terms of picking a paddle with other options, whether it's number of pieces or wood or carbon?
So I think when you're choosing a paddle, you've got everything from making your own out of a $25 piece of red cedar and just carving it out yourself. There's lots of instructions out on the web for doing that. That's I say the cheapest and the I don't know about easiest. I'm not the best woodworker myself. I have made one, but it wasn't easy for me. And so you can have wood paddles. You can also have carbon paddles, and most of the carbon paddles that are out there tend to be a very good shape, because nobody's going to make a mold for a carbon paddle out of a paddle that wasn't a good shape. So I think carbon paddles are good. I personally paddle mostly with a carbon paddle just because I like the lightness, and I also like the fact that it's tough. My carbon paddle looks basically brand new after 8 years of use, whereas my wooden paddles have to be oiled and sanded and treated pretty much every year. So.
Perfect.
And I guess also the 1-piece, 2-piece, 3-piece question. If you're traveling with your paddle, I would say a 3-piece is ideal. A 2-piece is okay, and a 1-piece would be really awkward for traveling. But I think the 1-piece is probably the best for what I would call everyday use if you're not traveling.
Yeah.
I should also mention one more thing. I have 2 paddles here made by the same guy, and they're actually exactly the same height and the same length. And I don't know if you can see that the one that's in this hand that I'm sliding up and down, what is it missing? Or what doesn't it have that this one has?
The shoulder.
The shoulder. So you can see this is a shoulderless paddle. This is, sorry, the one I'm holding with both hands right now is the shoulderless paddle. The one I'm holding right now is the shouldered paddle. I personally mostly prefer paddling with a shouldered paddle because it kind of gives me that indexing spot for my my hands to grip. But there's something to be said for the shoulderless paddle there, where you can completely smoothly slide up and down that paddle. I think that really comes down to personal preference.
Yeah, terrific. Larry's asking, is there any way to reinforce a wooden blade or to use carbon blades with a wooden handle? Which is interesting because I think that most mixed medium paddles actually have a carbon handle and a wooden blade.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on reinforcing a blade or mixed medium paddles?
I've seen people put fiberglass around the tips of their paddles to make them more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the tip of the paddle that gets most of the hits. And so if you take a wooden paddle and basically put a couple of layers of fiberglass around it, you can do that. And if you want, you can kind of up the aesthetics of it and make it white or make it colored, and that looks kind of cool.
Yeah, Harold is mimicking that. It sounds like he also gives feedback that he's done that to his, and it works great. The fiberglass tips. Mm-hmm.
Northern Light, way back when, sold some kind of rubber tips that you could buy for Greenland paddles, and I don't think they're available anymore, but those also helped protect the tips.
Terrific. Mike, this has been super informative, and love you sharing your passion and experience and knowledge on here. What kind of closing comments would you offer to somebody in terms of what they could do next for developing their skills and or habits with Greenland paddling?
I would say find somebody who can share their experience if you can. There's quite a few videos that are out there on how to use a Greenland paddle, and hopefully some of the tips that I've given today can help. I also wanted to show you one of my prize possessions, which is a Greenlandic throwing spear that a friend made for me. And this was a marvel of engineering. First of all, I can show you the tip. And the tip was set up that this part here, was attached to the line, and that was attached to the seal float. And if you notice, if I pull this off here, it's kind of stuck today. Yep. The tip actually completely separates. So the idea is that the tip would enter the animal, and it would, and these look like they're ivory, but it's just white painted wood. Anyway, so that was a part of the design of that one.
Cool. So fully releasable tips on the Harpoon, so that all that's really in there is a tip that has some sort of like barb mechanism, and it releases and then is tied to the float. So as soon as it's harpooned, it sticks, and the paddler's not attached to the animal.
And then the other part of this is, and you can see that there's this detachable throwing stick here. And some of you may have heard of the term addle-addle, and that was a spear throwing stick. And this is basically the Inuit equivalent of an addle-addle. And it just essentially gave you an arm extension. And I think you saw in the pictures that I showed earlier, kind of one of those in action. And throwing a harpoon was, both for distance and for accuracy, was part of the Greenland competition as well.
Terrific. And so what would one do with the throwing stick after you harpoon the animal? Is it part of the sort of killing process, or?
No, the throwing stick was, you had a throwing stick on board because that was how you threw your harpoon.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason that I think people would roll with a rolling stick is that, with the Norsack or the throwing stick, is that it would be there to, what's the word? It was with you, and so it was one more thing you could roll with. That makes sense.
So it's just another survival tool if things got weird as you're harpooning whales in your skin on frame kayak. So I think you've got some. I think you have some images that sort of depict you actually throwing that that spear. How does that? Maybe share that with us to see how you might throw a spear sitting in.
I'm going to try sharing some of these quickly, and let's see if this works. And I'll just try and do a quick share here. So first of all, I just wanted to show you a few pictures of. Let's see if I can go next here. I spent a whole week at building a kayak, and you can just see here the kind of stages of building This is actually the Disco Bay in action, and this is my F1. And instead of using sealskin, we used ballistic nylon, and started off all white, and then by the time it now is yellow because the goop that we covered it with has yellowed with age. And you can see we have an oak cockpit there.
Beautiful.
And there I am paddling the traditional one. You can see how low the back deck is.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little bit about the competition. This is a Greenlander who I met up in Sissimute 2 years ago. And one thing that I thought was really cool is that the tulik he was wearing, does anybody know where that's made?
No.
They're made in Vancouver, they were made in Vancouver by Brooks.
Oh, great.
So the guy who was demonstrating rolling to our ship was Imanorak. He was wearing a Vancouver-made tulik on his boat.
Very cool.
So there he is doing some rolls. And the Greenland competition involved all those 5 stages, the race, the 2 races, rolling, harpoon throwing, and then rope gymnastics. You can see here people are racing. The harpoon throwing, the Norsak, and you can see here a hunter. They had different ends to their harpoons for birds, for seals, and so on.
Larry's got a question. If you throw the spear and the hook separates onto the line, how is the spear recovered?
It floats, so you go by later and pick it up.
I see. Great. So you're showing an image right now. It looks like of a close-up. Can you go back to that one of the paddler actually throwing the spear? It looks like they're maintaining the paddle in one hand and throwing the spear with the opposite hand.
And I think generally you're holding the paddle in the middle to kind of balance the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see there, and this is actually not a seal, but a float. And you can kind of see the whole kind of attachment. This picture I took from a museum in Greenland.
I see. So the throwing stick actually has some bit of a hinging mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Well, Harold has also commented that he's got some experience doing this, and he was very successful at hunting down the bow of his own boat.
Yes, I've done that too. And you can see here a modern kayaker throwing a spear quite like mine in competition. And I found this actually right beside the Sissimute Kayak Club in Greenland. And you can see here, this is basically their target. And you got the most points if your spear entered that little hole, which in the middle, which would be pretty amazing at, I think, about 10 meters or so.
And probably what you'd actually have to do to be able to actually harvest an animal.
So there's 34 different, I think I said 36, there's 34 different maneuvers, and I've already mentioned there. And I'm just gonna see if I can show you, this is me getting ready to do some rolling. That's called a sculling for support. And actually this is this is in my Greenland kayak, my Disco Bay. And I think, let me see if this works. No, I think this is the one I've already done. Here I can show you another one. This is a brick roll.
Nice.
I'm holding a small brick there. And then I'm just going to skip to the next one here. I think this one here, let me see if I've got. So this was the beginning of the competition. You would start by sculling on one side. And you would get points for doing each maneuver on each side. And then you have to do a chest scull, so that's basically a face down. The forward finishing roll is essentially the same as the back finishing rolls, except that you're facing down instead of facing up.
And when you roll a track with your Greenland style paddle, what is your finish typically?
I do either. I generally, my go-to roll is a back deck roll, and so I tend to use that, but I found both of them work.
Any tips for people who are paddling with or experimenting with a Greenland paddle who are not on a skin and frame boat, like one that doesn't have a hard chine like you would expect from a Greenland style? Like just a hard boat or a fiberglass boat or plastic with no hard chine?
I think, to be honest, if you're using a Greenland blade, and I think one of the things that people discover with a Greenland blade is that one of the most important skills to learn with your paddle is to scull that blade on the water. Whether you're bracing, if you're familiar with a low brace, you don't just plunk the paddle down, you scull it as part of your brace. You also, when you're rolling, you're not just yarding down, you're not pulling down on the paddle, you're sliding it through the water. And that sliding gives you the lift and makes the maneuver very gentle. And I think once you learn that, rolling a kayak becomes quite easy.
Terrific.
Quite easy is relative.
Great. Robert's asking, what are the best skills to work on prior to learning how to roll? I think we talked about this a little bit last week. We mentioned, I know Dan gave a presentation on the low brace and high bracing. Anything else you would add to that for Robert here looking to grow? I
would say bracing is very key, because essentially the standard Greenland roll is a glorified high brace.
Terrific.
So if you can do a side scull and then come back up on one side, then that's basically the hardest part of the roll, because going over is really easy.
Awesome. Terrific. Well, in closing, Mike, it sounds like your encouragement is for people to embrace Greenland paddles. It's all learnable, right? It sounds like you're encouraging people to find mentors, to get out there, get a coach, and certainly to get out there and practice on the water those foundational skills as frequently as possible. Anything else you'd add to that for additional resources or thoughts?
I would say if you've never tried a Greenland paddle before, give it a good half day, and don't give up on it too quickly, because if you're not burying the blade well, I find that I have absolutely no trouble keeping up with other paddlers using big Euro blades with lots more power, a possibly faster cadence to my blade, and also, what's the word I'm looking for? By burying the blade and torso rotating it, keeping it through, I find I can maintain the same speed as other paddlers very easily.
Got it. Okay, so give it a go, give it an honest try before judgment. Really sounds like the trip there. So, Mike, I just want to thank you so much. What are some ways that if folks want to consult with you, or maybe even get you as a setup as a coaching sesh or a customized coaching approach, either virtually or live with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I just pasted in my email address there into the chat, and I'm more than happy to answer questions by email.
Great.
And if anybody's coming to the Victoria area, send me a message, and great to get together for a paddle. I try to paddle once or twice a week when I'm here, and I think
terrific.
As you might have seen from my blog, I think I'm on paddle number, what was it, 6304 for the year. So.
Fantastic. Awesome. The other thing, Mike, is it occurs to me that you're going to be participating in the Pacific Rim Surf Camp that's going to be on the Wild Wet West Coast. We do have 4 spots available for that. It's a little uncertainty if people outside of Canada will have easy access to that. It's certainly available for Canadians. At this point, we still have folks from the United States planning on attending, but 4 spots left for the Pacific Rim Surf Camp. There's a link to that for everyone. You can learn more about that and or register if you like. How about following you on social media, Mike? What are your links there that where folks can, track you in the world? Do you have an Instagram account or anything like that?
I have an Instagram account that I don't know the address of. I don't really update it very often. Yeah, I actually have no idea what it is.
Okay.
And I am on Facebook, but again, I think I'm not super active on social media.
Okay, sure.
I would say.
Fair enough. Well, sounds like email is the best place to get in touch with you. The other thing, if folks are interested in picking up a paddle and learning how to do this or upgrading their paddle, I've just put in a link that for a deal that TRAK is currently having on a two-piece carbon paddle. The Inukshuk paddle is currently on sale until next Wednesday, and there's 15 of those left for North American consumers with a limit of 2 per paddler on that. If you're in the EU, there's an unlimited number available, and that's an all-in investment. So it's shipped within the EU. So that really turns into a really great deal. If you happen to be in the European Union, you can use that link to order that as well. So get in touch with us on that one. What's up next for TRAK Beyond the Boat is on August 28th, we have another installment in the Wellness Equals Water series. I'm going to put a post to that. We just had a really great friend of TRAK on that one. I encourage you to see that. By signing up, you'll get access to the previous episodes. On September 4th, we have 3 Steps to Kayaking with TRAK pilot Pete Kuhn, who's going to be discussing rolling fundamentals, and he's also a Greenland paddler. So you'll be able to take this conversation to the next level in terms of learning how to roll, and specifically how to even bring in some Greenland technique to that. So I just posted the link to sign up for the 3 Steps to Kayaking. For the next episode is Rolling Fundamentals with TRAK pilot Pete Kuhn. And also want to encourage people to, if you're on this program and you're interested in becoming a TRAK pilot like Mike Jackson and so many others on here, I will post our pilot application and you can fill that out and connect with us about, if you want to get more involved with TRAK. The other thing I want to offer, as I know that some people were asking on this call about how to learn more about the TRAK 2.0 assembly, I'm posting a link to the TRAK Foundations program that is a free resource for level 1 skills progression in an online learning format that's virtual. You're welcome to take advantage of that. And if you wanted to do it together, we also have a skills accelerator program that goes along with that TRAK Foundations program. And I'll put that link in there as well. And it's a 4-month program that really focuses on working with a group to be able to really accelerate your skills faster. We've had a couple of folks that are on this call that have just done that. And let's see, we've got, I'll post that
Hans,
there. Yep,
I was going to mention one more thing. Somebody commented earlier in the chat about round versus oval shafts.
Oh, yes.
Like the loom section. And the traditional Greenland paddles tended to have an oval loom. And I think most handmade and actually most carbon Greenland paddles have that oval loom. And that oval loom, again, just, I don't know, for me, it just feels right in my hands. And, but Euro paddles typically have a completely round loom, and I think there's a few Greenland paddles that have the round loom, but oval is the kind of traditional shape.
Okay,
and
so
kind of bigger than a Euro paddle loom typically.
All right, so another variable in the ongoing sort of paddle decision.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. Yeah, it seems like the most important thing is just to start, because they're so forgiving that almost anything you choose will you know,
if you make your own, you can try lots of different options.
Yeah. I have noticed that people who make their own tend to have quite a quiver. Yeah, excellent. Well, Mike Jackson, thank you so much for your expertise and your education here. Folks are sounding off with appreciation here. Please give Mike a round of applause with either your reactions or in the chat box here. Thanks so much for that. And do get in touch with Mike if you'd like to learn more. And at this point, we're kind of officially hanging out.